All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode on What the Sheet. And in today's episode, I'm going to be going over my Ryobi Airstrike nailers. So I have two. I'll turn the camera a little bit. So I have an 18 gauge brad nailer, which is almost identical to my Ridgid air nailer. So this is good for kind of more heavy duty type nailing applications where you don't necessarily want a big nail head like a framing nailer, but you need something maybe more temporary, like picture frames or nailing something to your wall like baseboard trim. Something like that works pretty good. And then over here I have the 23 gauge pin nailer, and this is good for temporarily holding something down to either like a workbench, or I use this a lot for doing picture frames, just because the pinholes leave very small. They have a very small head on them, so there's nothing to fill with putty, and once you put them in, they're almost invisible unless you know they're there. So I've been using this a lot lately compared to my 18 gauge nailer. So first we'll go over the two 18 gauge nailers that I have and kind of compare and contrast them a little bit, and kind of reasons why I still have my air nailer and the reason why I use my cordless one more than the air nailer. So we'll start with the air nailer. It's got a tray here for your nails. It can shoot up to 2-inch 18 gauge brad nails, and then it has a tip on it that's got a safety tip. So in order to fire the gun, you have to depress the tip, and that'll disengage safety mechanism, and you can shoot nails. And then this also has the ability to do either single shot or bump fire. And in bump fire mode, basically all you have to do is just keep the trigger depressed, and then every time you depress the nose tip, it'll fire a nail until the cartridge is empty, basically. Two of the main benefits of using an air nailer versus a cordless one is the size and the weight. So air nailers are naturally going to be smaller than a cordless nailer, just because they don't have to maintain or hold the energy that they use. So air nailer, you just hook a hose up to it, and then your source of energy is somewhere else. And then since it doesn't need a big electric motor or a bigger air tank on here to fire the striking pin, the head of it can be a lot smaller. So if you're trying to get into tighter spaces, something like this might be a little bit more beneficial. Or if you're doing a lot of nailing with 18 gauge nails, using an air nailer might benefit you in the long run, just because you're not carrying a lot of extra weight around with a cordless nailer versus an air nailer. And then in this particular case, this nailer has a clear or see-through cover for the nail slot, or the magazine, however you want to refer to it as, which is really beneficial to see kind of where you're at and if you need to reload your magazine, versus the Ryobi nailer. It has a viewing window near the front right here. It's got two cutouts so you can see kind of when you're getting low on nails, but it's not as readily visible, versus having a clear slide mechanism like it is on the Ridgid. But other than that, their features are pretty much the same. The Ryobi still has the depressible tip as a safety mechanism. And one other benefit of the Ryobi is it has LED lights on it. So if you're working kind of in a dimmer area, or you just want to make sure you're going to hit a line on your workpiece, having these LED lights on both sides really light up the nose of the gun, making it a lot easier to hit where you're trying to hit with your nail. This one also shoots up to 2-inch brad nails. So in here right now I have some 2-inch brad nails. So both of these guns shoot the same nails, which is beneficial for me. That means I don't have to worry about limited capacity on one versus the other. And some of the downsides of a cordless nailer are just the overall size and weight. Just kind of almost the opposite of the Ridgid nailer. So I have a 3 amp hour battery on here. You can do smaller batteries. I just don't have any. And just the overall kind of dimensions of the back side of the nailer. So if I hold up both nailers. You can kind of see that the Ryobi nailer is almost twice the diameter of the Ridgid nailer, so it's a lot bigger cylinder up here where the pin is that fires a nail, and the weight, I would say, with the battery on, it's at least twice the weight of the Ridgid nailer. So I don't, if I'm doing a lot of nailing, I won't use the cordless nailer, just because over time it just kind of gets fatiguing, and then if you're manipulating it side to side, that's a lot of extra weight to be kind of holding out, versus with this, even loaded or with the hose on, it's still more easily maneuvered, versus the Ryobi. What else? The Ryobi nailer also has the bump fire mode. It's the same as the Ridgid, so same concept. Depress the trigger, and then every time you push the safety tip all the way down, it'll fire a nail until the magazine's empty. And it has all the same adjustments, so the depth of fire adjustments, and then since this is cordless, it has a kind of pressure regulator on the backside here that you can turn up or down to really tune in how consistently the nails are being fired into whatever material you're shooting into. And for me, I usually shoot into pine. That's usually what I'm making my stuff out of, or even sometimes oak. But I haven't had to make any adjustments to this nailer yet. It's been really consistent. I don't think I've had any misfires or any jams or anything like that with it so far. And moving on to the 23 gauge pin nailer. So this, like I said, is really good. I've been using this a lot for picture frames, or if you're doing a glue up, these work really well as well. Because if you're doing a glue up, you can put your glue on the picture frame, for example, and then instead of trying to clamp everything together, you can use these pins, pop a couple pins in the corner, go around, you can have your whole frame kind of locked together, and then while the glue dries, the pins act as a clamp, and then you don't have to worry about coming back through and covering up the pinholes like you will with the 18 gauge nailer, just because the pins are a lot smaller. This also has an LED light, but it just has a single light on the front. There's no safety tip, so in order to shoot this gun, all there is just a little flip trigger behind the firing trigger. So you have to depress this, and then you can squeeze, and it'll just fire a nail. No bump fire, just single trigger pull, single nail. The pins look like this. So it comes in a kind of a gold plated sheet almost looking, and then it has printed arrows on the front, on the one side, that indicate which way to put them in the either your air nailer or your cordless nailer, and they're very, very thin, so you can almost barely see them, but it's about the thickness of a pencil lead, for reference. And this nailer will do up to 1 3/8 pins. If you buy an air nailer, so an air version of a 23 gauge pin nailer, they can shoot 2-inch pins. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some scrap wood, and I'll show you kind of how quickly the 18 gauge nailer fires in bump fire mode, along with kind of how consistently it'll drive the nails. And then I'll compare that to the pin nailer and kind of show you how small and kind of even how quickly this nailer will fire in comparison to the 18 gauge, and that way you can kind of see the difference that you get between an 18 gauge nail and a 23 gauge pin nail. Okay, so I have some, I think it's a 2x8 piece of scrap from when I made my Adirondack chairs. So we got a clean edge here, no nails in it, and I'm just going to do 5 nails bump fire with the 18 gauge, and then we'll do another 5 with the pin nailer, and we'll just kind of, I'll have them next to each other so you can see the size difference between the two nailers. Okay, so see if I can get you in the right light here so you can see kind of what's going on. So on the bottom side here, we have the 18 gauge nails, so those bigger holes, and then that's kind of that straight row right there Those will be the 23 gauge pin nails. And all the nails are set flush. The 18 gauge are set just below the surface. So if you wanted to cover them with wood putty so that we don't see them, that's where they're set at. So just a thin covering of wood putty. Scrape it clean, sand it down a little bit, and then you're ready to go. The pin nails are kind of in a similar situation where if you wanted to cover them with wood putty or whatever, I guess, material you want to cover it with, you can. However, since they're so small, you really don't need to. So I'll show you an example piece. So here is one of the fishing brag boards. And on the ends, you can just barely see there's 2 holes here, and then there's also a hole right where my finger is from the pin nail. And that's all it holds the frame of this fishing board onto the back, is pin nails all the way around. There's about, I think it's like 2 dozen, so there's, between all 4 sides, there's about 2 dozen nails holding the frame to itself, and then the frame to the actual backer piece as well. So as you can see, the pin nails, for as small as they are, they actually do a pretty good job of holding material together. And then I'll do one more kind of example to show you how well pin nails work. So I got 2 pieces of 3/4 inch pine. They're clearly not connected. And I'm just going to put 4 pins kind of in the corners and show you how much force it takes to separate just these 2 smaller pieces of pine. Alright, so they're connected, not holding them together, and I'll try and separate them just with my hands. And as you can see, you know, it's just those 4 little pins were able to hold these 2 pieces of wood together. And I think in the previous videos when I made drawer boxes and stuff like that, I used my pin nailer to actually hold all 5 sides of the drawer, the base and the 4 corners, or the 4 sides. And that's enough to actually be able to manipulate the whole drawer without it falling apart. So pins are really good for kind of temporary holding and not using clamps or anything like that. And then, like in the case of the drawer bottoms, what I did was I would pin it, then come back through and put screws in to actually finish securing the drawer bottoms itself. So we'll separate this, and then I'll show you the added benefit of using pins. Yeah, okay. So we got it separated. If you can see, maybe you can kind of see it. So there's a little pin right there. There's a pin right here. So these pins are very thin, which is good. Like I said, for covering up holes, or not having to cover up holes. But the added benefit is, let's say you had pinned this to your workbench as like a stop for something, and you pull it out. So now you have these pins either on that piece or on your workbench. Versus if you were to do that with an 18 gauge nailer, you'd probably have to get either pliers to try and pull that nail out, or a side cutter and try and get as close as you can, and then hammer it down, and then just hope that it doesn't kind of work its way back out and start scratching future projects. So with pins, what you can do is you can take your fingers or pliers and you just kind of wiggle the pin back and forth a few times, and then the pin itself will break off, and then it'll leave nothing on the surface. So there's only the 1 pin there, so I'll break this other one off. And now there's nothing there. And there's a little bit of a bump from where the wood grain has kind of popped up. But if you're really concerned about that, you can take a sander to it, just go over it real lightly, and it'll knock down those wood grains. And with the pins being so thin, if you are sanding the surface, let's say you use it to hold a picture frame on, then you want to sand it and then do a nicer finish over. Since they're so small, when you sand it, it'll just come right down. It'll go down with the regular surface of the wood, so you don't have to worry about a nail kind of popping out and tearing up your sandpaper or anything like that. That'll do it for today's video. I will put a link for both of the nailers in the description. So like I said, there's 18 gauge and a 23 gauge. And Ryobi also makes, or at least they used to make, an 18 gauge stapler, and they do make a crown stapler. So Ryobi has a pretty good selection of air nailers, or cordless nailers, and I do believe they also make a 16 gauge nailer, so that'd be a little bit bigger nail than this one, a little bit wider diameter. I don't think they make framing nailer yet. I would assume maybe in the future they might move up to making a 3-inch framing nailer, which would be kind of nice. But other than that, that'll conclude today's video. If you guys have any questions about these nailers, or why maybe I prefer these over my air nailer, go ahead and drop them in the comments down below. If I get enough people asking questions, I'll make another video about it. And then other than that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.